Genesis 26, verse 1. There was a famine in the land, besides the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And what does Isaac do? He does what Abraham did. He didn't go as far. And this is one of the places where Isaac is rightly faulted for some of his rationalizing about some things in life. Well, God didn't like him when he went to Egypt, but I'll just go over here to the Philistines. And so he does, and so he runs into trouble over there. But notice how the pattern and the principle is established of failure. So they fail, and so some of the promises aren't received because of their lack of consistent trusting in God and following His principles. That same principle applies with Christians today. We miss out on some of the blessings in this life that God intends for every believer to enjoy. We don't have the promises of a land and of material wealth in the same way that the Israelites received. And we've been given spiritual blessings and spiritual opportunities. And we've been promised what we need for functioning in this life. But we often miss out on things that God would want to work in us and give us a joy in accomplishing, simply because we're not trusting Him in a practical way, even though we're born again. And we miss when we do that. And we compromise with things in the world like Abraham and Isaac did. And we fall short of what God intends in our own lives. So what happens is that Israel ends up as a nation going into bondage in Egypt. That's what the ultimate judgment will be, bondage in Egypt. And this is actually predicted in chapter 15. If you go back there, you'll note in chapter 15 that during this time when God was cementing the covenant with Abram in this covenant sacrifice ritual, it says parallels to ancient covenants where agreements were made. Instead of both parties going between the sacrifices, parts of the sacrifice representing their mutual commitment to the covenant, only what represents God goes between it. Abram's over in the corner sleeping. So it's rather interesting that God commits Himself and He'll fulfill it. But notice what it says here in verse 13. He says to Abram, this is in his sleep, he says, "Know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterward they shall come out with great possessions. Now as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a good old age. But in the fourth generation they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete." God reveals to Abraham a number of things here. But notice in particular that the judgment would be bondage in a foreign land for 400 years. So it's an approximation that is predicted here. It would actually end up being 430 years. Around 1875 BC is when Joseph is ruling in Egypt. And because of famine again in the land of Israel, God superintended to make provision through Joseph so that they would not starve. The difference that happens with this is with Jacob. What does Jacob do in the midst of the famine? He doesn't go to Egypt right away. You know, he's remembering, well, Abraham did that, and then my father did that business with the Philistines. I don't think I should be going to Egypt. You know, it's foolish, ignorant once and foolish twice, and then what is it, stupid the third time? I think Jacob's thinking that. So what does he do? He offered sacrifices. Chapter 46, you see that in verse 1. And then God speaks to him, and he tells him, okay, now's the time to go to Egypt. Joseph has made provision because I provided for Joseph. Now's the time to go. But notice that Jacob watches for what God directs him to do. Because the judgment is already in place because of the sinful failures of Jacob and his father and grandfather. Jacob goes to Egypt. Sometime later, after Joseph dies, the Egyptians enslave the Israelites. And when we open the book of Exodus, we find them